Welcome to Kettlebell Corner, where strength meets theory, where we take you on a deeper dive into all things kettlebells. And am I doing this right, Roger?
Nope.
If you have to ask, then the answer is what?
Nope.
It's no, okay? Well, then where the hell do you start? Well, in this episode, we're going to lead you down the right path, and we're going to start with first principle-based thinking. Well, the first principles, some of them. Roger, what's up? How you doing?
I'm good, I think.
All right, you're more than good to me. You're great. Great. All right, so some people might be here and be like, oh my God, what does this have to do with kettlebells? Well, let's tell them what's up. First, what is first principle-based thinking?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Tell me right now. I got to know. How am I supposed to fix my shit if you don't tell me right now?
It's a method of looking at a problem and working toward a solution. The solving problems can get difficult. It can get really, really complicated and a little murky. And sometimes you need to reduce everything. You need to tear everything down. Okay. You get rid of all the nonsense. With kettlebells specifically, get rid of all of the buzzwords, the dogma. Forget about the shapes. Forget about the cues. Let's just reduce everything and give, basically just have a completely clean slate, and let's work up from there. Your first principles are going to be the things that are going to be true outside of context. So I don't think that we can establish anything with certainty, especially not physics, which is what we're going to talk about. Because even within physics, there's a percentage there's a probability that physicists will assign. There's a margin of error, but let's assume that that's zero, just for the sake of the thought experiment. So let's stipulate that first principles are always going to be true, at least while you're on Earth.
Okay.
Then let's say they're going to fit into a context, a given situation, which is going to be changeable. Okay. It's going to be variable. So your first principles are the things that will not change. So you and I have different body shapes, different abilities. We might have different goals. Those are all going to be part of the context, and that context is going to vary based on the lifter. In fact, I mean, the context is going to vary based on you. It might be how you're feeling. It might be your mood, what you've eaten. It might be the time of day. So that context will shift, but the first principles will not change. And these are the things that we're trying to establish. So when you get a really complicated or seemingly really complicated problem, how do I fix this? What's wrong with this? Rather than trying to layer one thing on another thing on another thing, we move backwards. It was completely unrelated. I was listening to a good audiobook recently about how the federal government works and solves technology problems. And with this, I want to say it was the Employment Development Department. And one of the things that they were notorious for doing is, rather than tearing down all their old technology and then building it back up, they just add a layer.
So they have the old shit and then the new stuff's just put on top.
Yeah. So everything is layer, and they never go back to the basically the first principles. They never go back to the origin and solve the problem. And that's kind of an analogy for what first principles thinking is. So you have a move, a skill, an exercise, and that exercise exists within a particular context. First principles thinking would be getting all of the stuff out of the way and saying, okay, what applies here? What are the simple things that are not going to deviate that I can use as kind of guideposts to work my way through this? Is this fair? Does this work as an explanation, a way to kind of set this up? Okay.
Yeah. So we're asking people to essentially erase their brains for a second and dial up some of these 5 that we think are a pretty good starting point to begin fixing your kettlebell skills.
Well,
and a simple understanding of these.
Yeah, and let me ask you this, because I mean, we've been coaching this stuff for a long time, but we changed the way we coached this stuff. And you tell me if this is true with your experience, because it seems like it was. We were in the beginning trying to follow simple directives. We were going back and listening to what coaches said. The cutesy little things. One of the things that I'm still salty about is you go back and
Don't
Dan
say
John,
the snatch as a swing overhead. Oh,
exactly. That's you go back and you read your manual or you watch a video. It's like, it's a swing that ends overhead. My arm's bent too much. I need it to be longer. I keep seeing it
Yeah.
bent, but he says it's a swing that ends overhead, and a swing has a straight arm. Therefore, maybe I need to get my arm straighter, and this is going to solve all my problems. Okay. This is how this usually proceeds. But then we changed. We started looking
Yeah.
at things differently, and we said, wait a second. We started interacting with coaches. They couldn't answer our questions. So we looked for other solutions. Would you say that the way that you coach and the way that you look at problems when you have someone who has an issue with form, would you say that it's changed?
Oh, 100%. And there are people that have been with me from the old way, and then
Mhm.
now they see it in a new way. And the progress just is exponential when we have these simple directives and like baseline places for them to kind of root in their work. So it's not less about this cue that I'm just saying to you, hey, do this, squeeze your butt, push your hips forward, do this sort of thing. It's more about, well, why is this feeling this way? Maybe the bell got away from you and now it's outside your base of support. So now you're going to create that torque on the back, and that's where it is. Or one of the ones that came up recently is my guy had an issue with a little pull in his forearm, like a little strain. And it
Mhm.
was because we were doing a little bit heavier press, and he had to clean a heavier bell. And when we talked about it afterwards, he wasn't like, dang, man, you really set me up for failure. I said, well, if you're having a problem there, chances are you try to use your arm to get it in place instead of what? And he's like, my legs. I go, exactly. So when you use when you use your legs and you connect these, that we went over the process again. He's like, oh, that makes total sense. So all we did was dial it back, and we worked on technique and make sure that these legs are doing what they're supposed to do in the arms where it's supposed to be, keeping the bell in the line that is best for the clean to get into that overhead position and whatnot.
Sure.
Some rest help.
And if you look at, we did an episode on this on what we use this particular algorithm, which is a process that we follow. One of the things is we work on the connection between the arm and the body. If you're doing a ballistic lift and your arm is not connected to your body, you can still do the lift, but it's not
Yeah,
going
it'll
to
happen.
be it will probably or maybe, but
Yeah,
it's
why
not
not?
going to be as efficient. It's not going to be
Yeah.
as good as it would if that connection were there. And underlying the arm to body connection is really the way force works, the way force transfers. And that is a form of first principles. So, I would be reluctant to say, hey, you need to keep your arm connected to your body would be first principle. But the way force moves in straight lines would be the fact that it's what's called a vector quantity. And you need to look after it if you want to move an object. The algorithm is close to using first principles thinking, and it's a way to make it a bit easier. It's kind of the Cliff Notes version rather than having to learn all these individual things, but it is helpful. No, there's something else that I think I should point out. This is our lens, and this is our particular way of looking at this particular modality, kettlebells. We could have a different framework entirely if we were working with, let's say, nutrition, or let's say you go back and your guy who had a problem with his clean, let's say there was a strain in his forearm and it was problematic. Well, maybe he can't use that forearm, and you need to start looking at anatomy a little differently rather than physics. You can use physics to maybe take some strain off of the lift and do it a different way, but maybe you have to go back and start looking at your anatomy first principles, or maybe you're working with nutrition. And as far as I understand it, energy balance is what determines whether people lose weight or gain weight. So if you have too many calories, you gain weight, not enough, you lose weight. And if it's even, you stay even. That would be a first principle. So these things are going to change, and this is one way of looking at at things. And again, I go back to this idea. People say you're complicating things. We're actually simplifying things. What's complicated or what's difficult is the process of doing it a different way. And don't call us out for being complicated when we give you 5 things that you can use to fix almost everything. And you are barking 10 cues for one particular skill, and then you have 6 skills. So we're using 5 things and you're using 60. And only you can teach the 60. That
Yeah.
math doesn't add up. So
Yeah.
this is
Anybody
this
could
is a
use
simpler
these.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's simpler. And I think sometimes, and I could be honest here, Roger, can't I? Well,
No.
I'm not a physics graduate. In fact, people, I didn't even go to college. And look at us, both of us sitting at the same table in different houses, in different rooms. Anyways, it is a little bit intimidating. And the way you said it right there is like, instead of thinking it's complicated, you're just removing all the stuff that you had before. Like I said in the beginning, just take a blank slate. Let's start from the ground up here. And let's just start with number one on the list, Roger. Does
Sure.
this equation mean anything to you? F equals M times A. Does that mean anything to you?
It does, buddy.
Okay, well, that's the equation for force for you who don't know. Yes. How does force play its part as one of our first principles?
Well, that's probably easily an episode on its own. So what I want to do is I want to call some things out in the equation that are not necessarily easy to see right away,
Okay.
and why we're talking
Make it
about the
easy.
force equation
Make it
in the
easy
first
on 'em.
place. So people will talk about a force as a push or a pull, and that's a fine definition, which can be misleading sometimes. Forces, you can't have forces but no motion. And I prefer, rather than push or pull, pushing or pulling. Like you can try to, I'm pushing the door open, but it's not opening. Right? I'm actively doing it, but it's not happening. So force is something that is potentially capable of changing the motion of an object. That's what we want. We've decided we want to exercise. We're exercising with kettlebells. In order to gain the physiological adaptations that we want, we have to change the motion of this thing. And what do we use? We use force. How do we apply force? Combination of our muscles and the ground, or some other implement, right? So
Yeah.
that's what force is, kind of. It's a really complicated thing, so don't bother to try to answer that question. So how do we know? How do we quantify this, right? Then we're starting to get into, we're looking at mass, and we're looking at acceleration. These are different things that we can tease out. First, with the mass piece, what I want to call out is mass is equal to something that is people talk about as an inertia, right? Inertia, which is the resistance to the change in a state of motion. Some people will say change in motion, but that's not. It's not resistance to motion, it's resistance to a change. So
What
if you've
stays
got
in
a
motion stays in motion type of thing, Roger?
kind of thing, yeah, you're thinking about, Indiana Jones and the boulders rolling at you. That boulder's got inertia, which is equal to its mass.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're actually having a hard time doing is slowing it down, not speeding it up. All right. In the beginning, it would be hard to get it moving, but once it's moving, it's hard to stop. So the first thing we want to call out with this piece is that the amount of mass you have determines how difficult it's going to be to start this thing moving or stop this thing moving. And this is common sense. You get a 12 kilo kettlebell versus a 40 kilo kettlebell, and they're going to be different. One's going to be harder to move. One's going to be easier to move. One's going to be harder to stop. The other one's going to be easier to stop. So the mass is equal to inertia. The more mass, the harder things are going to be to move. If that mass piece goes up, given the same amount of force, the acceleration is going to go down. Right?
They got to kind of match or be great.
Well,
One has to be greater than the other.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to move a bigger bell that has more inertia, you're going to need to find more force. So another thing I want to talk about with this mass piece is that there's what we call an inverse relationship between mass and acceleration. So if we have a given amount of force and mass goes up, suddenly you measure force in newtons. It doesn't really matter. Just pick 100, right? Just some random ass number. If you're putting a certain amount of force into an object and then that object gets bigger, the rate of acceleration, or the change in that speed of that object, is going to decrease because the inertia got bigger. Inertia, again, more inertia means it's resisting a change in motion. So as this goes up, the other thing's going to go down. Why is this relevant? Well, when we get into people who we get into different types of what people call power training. Not that you can't train that with a heavy bell, but there's also another part of this training where you might actually want to move it quickly. And if you're trying to move something quickly with a really big bell, you're not understanding this first principles way of evaluating. Wait a second. If my goal is to move quickly, then I need to lower the bell. I need to draw. I need to get a bell with less mass, because mass and acceleration have an inverse relationship. As one goes up, the other goes down. Okay. You with me so far?
So far, so good. If
Okay.
you have a heavy bell, you're going to need more force
That's
to
it.
continue it moving, period. If you have a light
Yeah.
bell, the more force you put in, the faster that bell's going to move. Ideal for power training if that's what you want.
And that seems so silly that we're even saying that. And I can't imagine that someone's not listening to this like, okay, no shit. But I see this. I've seen it literally hundreds of times where people like power training and they've got the biggest bell in the gym that they can barely swing.
Yeah. This
And
is an expression of power when I'm pressing it overhead. No, this is an expression of
it's so
force.
yeah, it doesn't really make sense. So you want to think about that if you have this bigger thing, you need to have more force to move it at the same rate, right? Acceleration is a change in speed or really velocity, but velocity is just speed with the direction. So let's forget about that.
Yeah. There's a whole
Another
book on
thing
it.
Another thing I want to point out is the fact that, and this is one of the most important things. And there are all kinds of things that we can really tease out in this equation. But the other thing that I really want to pull out that I think is perhaps the most important thing is that force itself is what is known as a vector quantity, right? It has a direction. And because it has a direction, the amount of force that's delivered depends upon how it's delivered. The analogy I usually use is we'll talk about, billiards or playing pool. Okay. If you have your cue, right? And let's say you're ready to break and you have a particular amount of force, you're probably going to try and deliver all of it into the center of that cue ball, right? Because you want to break the
All
balls.
those balls.
Yeah, exactly right.
Don't be a ball
Well,
breaker.
what if you need the same amount of force, but you have a ball down in the corner pocket, right? And you can't shoot it directly, then you're probably going to shoot it off to the side, right? You're not going to hit the cue ball directly. You're going to hit it to one, you're going to hit it left if you want it to go right. So the direction of that force is going to make a difference in where that goes. And this is one of the most important things that I think people should get out of force is that it moves in lines. And if there's a problem, you can look at that line. You can say, wait, where's the disconnect here? So let's do a simple exercise, and I'm going to put you on the spot like you like.
I love it.
So
that's why we're here.
Let's take a squat.
Okay.
Right. So we have
I love squats.
A specific example. Where's the force going to come from to squat up and down?
The ground.
The combination of
my legs.
Ground.
Yeah,
sure.
my legs and the ground.
Right. But you need both, right? So we've established your primary point of contact is going to be your foot, right? So
correct.
let's take that, all of those joints, and let's move up from there. What if you're out on the side of your foot? What if you're on the inside of your foot? What if you're on your toes? What if you're on your heels? What is going to happen to your force? If you are squatting and let's say you take a video and you see that you're pitched forward onto your toes, okay, you're going to see motion at other joints, but let's say your heel is lifting. Where is that force going to be concentrated or applied more? The front of your foot, the back of your foot, or the sides of your feet?
Front of my foot.
Okay. So if you go up the chain and you have knee problems, is that something maybe you want to fix?
Yeah, because now the knees are brunting a lot of the initial force.
And let's just say the front of your body. Let's even forget about knees. Yeah. Let's forget about all. Let's just say the stuff on the front of you is overloaded.
Really struggling. Yeah.
Okay. So, hey, shift back. Figure out a way. Hit someone with a foam roller, pull their hips back, whatever. Give them a cue. Now you're getting away from the first principle, and now you're going towards solving things. And the cue isn't going to be universal, but you're going to find a way to get someone to shift back. Maybe even put a box behind them. Hey, put your butt on this.
Sit on this. Yeah.
Exactly right. Super simple. Your butt goes back, your foot stays flat, you've solved the problem. All right. Let's keep going up the chain.
Okay.
Next we've got an ankle, and from the ankle you're going to have your tibias. You got two, but let's say we're just focusing on the one bone in your lower leg. And that's going to come up and that's going to make part of your knee, right? So when that ankle is bent and you've got a really kind of steep angle and the knee shoots forward, you're going to be predisposed to producing a particular type of force. Okay. You're going to be able to put force down better than vertical force, then you will be able to produce horizontal force. So we talk about what's called shin angle. Okay. So if we want to move backwards, we need to have some sort of forward shin angle, right? We can't, if you want to push yourself backwards, you want to push yourself forward, or rather, if you want to push yourself forward, you need those to move forward. You need to be
Right.
able to push. You need to push the ground down and back in order to move forward. So, depending upon how you want to move, how you want to jump, the angle of the shin is going to make a big difference, which is why when you see people jumping, they tend to have what's called a positive shin angle. So the knee is going to come forward so you can push down into the ground.
Yeah.
Now, let's take a top view. Let's say you're looking down at the top of your squat and you see your knee. And let's say your knee is on the inside of your foot. So you're looking down, you see your knee, and then on the outside of your knee, you see your foot. What a lot of people, they hear this valgus collapse thing.
Sounds
Valgus is
scary.
natural, it happens, but this is to the point where you can't even see the foot underneath the knee. Are you getting, we've established that the force comes from the ground, it's contact force, and that force moves in straight lines. This is where this stuff comes in handy. If you were using the segment between your foot and your femur to push into the floor, yet your knee is not lined up over your foot, are you getting all of the force? Forget about anatomy, forget about you injuring yourself. Are you getting an optimal push? Are you getting a good straight line? Thinking back to that cue ball analogy, right? Thinking back
Yeah,
to the
no, you're
the
not,
straight line.
because you're off. The force is going in the line. It's going to go in that line regardless. But if you move the movers to a direction, it's like that. It's exactly like that cue ball. It's going to spin off, and
Sure.
you're going to leave some on the table.
So forget about injury. That's a thing. That's something you should be worried about. Forget about that. But you're not. Let's say you're struggling with 3 reps and you think you should be able to get 5. Push your knees out. Maybe you have the opposite problem. Push your knees in. Just line the thing up with the thing that's pushing the other thing. That's what we're
And
talking
there,
about
now you've
with
done the thing with force.
that's
You want to
where
line the things up with the moving parts of the thing,
that's
right?
it.
That's
But
it.
this is what I'm talking about. So we can leave force alone for now because I don't want to get too deep into this because we can get lost. I've seen me do it. But I do want to establish that the lines are really important. So if you go back and you see a problem with a lift, follow the lines. Our bodies don't move in straight lines. They just don't, but our intentions do. We intend to move up and down, forward and back, left to right, whatever it is. So that's a starting point. So look at those lines, and we can probably leave the first one alone for now. That's
Okay,
probably
line it up.
enough.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Line it up. All right, number 2, you already kind of alluded to this earlier, and it's that inertia, that something is moving, it's going to want to stay in that way, and something is not moving, it's going to want to stay in that way. And ultimately, that's really training. When you want to get something moving, keep it moving, and then you eventually want to stop it.
It is, and this again, this kind of comes into this line, right? This resistance. So if you want to understand that everything is going to resist a change. So you need to watch your lines, you need to watch your angles, you need to be ready to resist you need to be ready to resist these things. That things are going to push back, they're going to fight back. They're not going to want to do what it is you want to do unless you get the conditions down right. So if you are finding inertia that you can't overcome, then you're going to go back, and again, you're going to want to go back to that force piece. You're going to want to go back to the mass piece. How do I produce more force? And you're going to have to figure out either A, I need to get stronger, right? If we've got a press that isn't going up, let me check my lines. Are my lines right? We'll get into this a little bit too. Is my balance right? If it's not, I'm going to need to go back and rework some things. And if everything is exactly where it needs to be, I'm just going to need to get stronger. But
Yeah.
the law of inertia, it kind of gives you, in my opinion, this idea that you can make changes, that you're not, the things are just happening for no reason. So you can follow these lines, and you understand that you can move with purpose rather than, well, I don't know why this is happening. It's happening because you're misapplying force one way or the other. So luckily the 1 and 2 were kind of the same thing. And again, we can get into following the lines, following the force.
Yeah. And that'll lead to that overcoming. Well, I don't know if is it overcoming inertia, or is it
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah,
it's
and look,
overcoming the
and
inertia for wherever it's at. If it's at the static and you want it to be over your head, you've got to overcome that stopped inertia. If you're doing a snatch and you need to put it back on the ground or something, you need to overcome that movement of
yeah,
inertia, right?
or they
Pretty
call it
much.
dynamic. The static and dynamic are terms that people often talk about. But again,
Yeah, they
it
seem
makes this stuff
hoity-toity, if you ask me.
it makes this whole thing a little bit more intentional.
Okay, so those go together. Now, number 3 is the center of mass, and this is like, I don't know, this was one of the game changers in my training period for pressing. But the center of mass is something we all have, Roger, and you've gone over this on other episodes before, so we have many references to this. But and then let me get this straight, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So we have our center of mass right above our junk, right, as you affectionately put it, kind of that pubic bone, if I'm using anthropomorphic terminology. Did I say that
Yes
right?
and no. You have to be careful. You have to talk about context.
Okay. This is without kettlebell. This is just standing there, right? Normal,
We'll call it the anatomical center of mass. So
anatomical. Okay.
okay, so
Well, at
yeah,
least I pronounced that word right.
we have most people have a center of mass that between, like you're saying, between your belly button and your pubic bone. Okay, that's your anatomical center of mass. And as you said, you add a kettlebell, which is adding mass. So you're adding more mass to the mass you already have. That point will change. If you move, if you reorient yourself, that point will also change. When you run, one of the common examples when you're learning about this physics of movement is when people dive, when they go off of a high dive and they're dropping and they're spinning, their center of mass is actually not even in their body because you're moving around that. That's a point around which you're rotating,
That's
right? So
heady.
it's kind of cool. I was like,
Yeah.
what? But yeah, that's a point around which you will rotate because your center of mass is a point that is really one point that represents all of your body. Okay, so we were kind of talking offline. I'll give this example. So let's say you're standing there minding your own business, and I come up behind you and I'm a jerk. I'm like, oh, look at this
Mm.
guy. I want to knock him down. So let's say I run at you full bore and I hit your center of mass with my center of mass. You're probably
Our
going to fall.
pubic bones bump together? Is that what
Ideally
you're
not.
getting at? Okay.
So interestingly though, your center of mass is going to be oriented differently than mine because I'm going to lower my shoulder. I'm changing my
Yeah,
center of mass.
so now you've changed your position, so now your center of mass is more towards that shoulder
Yeah,
to come in a
and
lot harder.
exactly right. So I'm going to knock you down, and you're going to move. You're going to do what's going to happen is displacement. So you're going to move forward. But
Yeah,
what happens
into
if
a
I just
roll and stand right up, just so you know, just so everybody's
obviously,
clear on it.
yeah, you probably would roll and then come up executing some sort of flying kick or something.
Yeah.
But let's say I, for whatever reason, misdirected my force and I hit you in your left shoulder. You're going to spin, right?
Yeah,
So the
into a
center of
spinning
mass,
kick.
the center of mass is going to dictate what happens to the object. So if you put force through center of mass, what happens is displacement, right? And if I put it away from that center of mass, you're going to get torque. And it's really easy to see, if you have like I have right here a mug. So spin
Mhm.
it this way. If I push in the center, the mug actually, I don't want to do that. It's going to come off the coaster and spill. Use coasters, people. Don't be savages. So
Sometimes use
push the
coasters.
coaster. If I push the coaster in the middle, the mug is going to slide away from me.
Yeah,
If I push the corner of the coaster, it's going to spin.
yeah.
Right. So where you
Mhm.
apply force makes a difference. In one situation, I'm putting force through the center of mass and it moves away from me. In another situation, I'm applying it to the corner and torque happens. Well, why does that matter? Let's go back to the press. We really need to think about lining things up with the center of mass of the bell. We can get into some individual mechanics on this a little bit later, but you really need to think about how you apply force to the center of mass when you move an object. And again, this is not going to change. So that's why we included in this kind of first principle thing. So understanding center of mass, and we will get to specific examples of using these things. So we won't leave you hanging here.
Yeah. No hanging. For all you bibliophiles out there, we already kind of alluded to number 4. You see how these, I got to tell you, these all just kind of go together. It's like they're made for each other, Roger. These are a great first 5, and that is torque and force designed to always travel in a straight line. So where does torque play into this? Is this now when you've offset your center of mass against where the force is being applied? Is that essentially what we're getting at with that? Or did we just cover all that?
Yeah, that's one aspect. I think the thing to really understand about torque is, like you said, force moves in straight lines. So torque is the effectiveness of a straight line force at causing rotation. So you're a dad, you bring the kid to the park and you put them on a merry-go-round. Do you do that? Is that a thing? Like, do kids do that anymore?
No, but they have other things like that. I know. I get where you're going.
Do
If
they
you're
not have
listening to this,
merry-go-rounds anymore?
no, they have at the
Jeez.
park we occasionally frequent. There's something like a merry-go-round, but basically the same thing. It's just a more contained. Don't hold on to the handles, fly 30,000 feet in one direction, sort of thing. But remember, Roger, the people listening to this are people that have been on merry-go-rounds. Trust
Yeah,
me,
if
this
you've never
applies.
gotten bloody from a merry-go-round, you haven't lived. So you need to get your kid out there, rough them up a little bit.
Yeah,
Anyway,
occasionally.
and use coasters. Two things, two pieces
Yeah.
of advice.
So be
That's
extremely
gold.
dangerous at the park and extremely cautious at your coffee table.
Don't leave rings on the furniture. Anyhow,
Yeah.
so when you push the merry-go-round, right? Well, you're not pushing the center. If you're pushing the center of the merry-go-round, it wouldn't move. But
Yeah.
you got this little demon who wants to, go faster until they fly off and bust their head. You're pushing forward, and the whole thing is spinning. So the point that you are pushing from the center of the thing, the axis of rotation, the farther away, the more effective your force is at causing rotation. It's also going to be harder to push, right? But if you really want to get that thing flying, for those who do know, merry-go-rounds have usually bars that go from the center out. So if you're pushing, you don't want to generate a lot of force. Maybe you want to push more toward the center of the thing on the bar rather than all the way on the end, because there's a big distance component there. The moment arm is the distance between where you apply force and the axis of rotation. So as that distance gets bigger, torque increases. So that's really what we want to think about with that.
Yeah. So back to our original looking at the shape of a snatch where it's supposedly a swing that ends overhead. When we're hitting those straight arms all the way out, arcing up to the top, that's going to apply a lot more torque than the method that we're accustomed to using now, which more or less keeps that arm on the body for as long as possible and closer to the body as it goes up. So if you're doing your snatches with that wide arc, you're causing a lot of torque.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which
And
makes, it's going to make that force a lot more effective at causing rotation, which means you need to stabilize more rotation, which means more wear and tear on the joints.
Yeah. And it could be harder, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah. Because there's that now and plus there's the force lines. The force lines are now askew, essentially, since your bell's way out in front of you at this point. It all goes together.
Yeah, and let's be very clear too that we want to restrict this to hard style. That we have the intention of moving things quickly, because things do change. The whole movement changes once you get into kettlebell sport, and they've got a very good, very efficient way of doing things. It's just different. So we do need to restrict this to hard style.
Yeah, we're primarily hard style. And if by primarily I mean only, then yes. For now, everybody.
So what do we got?
We're always learning. We're always expanding. Number 5, and this will be the last one we give you, and you already talked about it, and that's balance. Okay.
Yeah. And just simple definition. So that center of mass we talked about, that needs to stay over your base of support. And your base of support is when you're standing at your feet. If you are doing a bench press, it's the bench. If you're standing and you're leaning on a wall, it's your feet and the wall. Whatever your body's touching, that's your base of support. Anything that can support you. So if you keep your center of mass, which will shift depending upon, how you're moving and whether or not you have a kettlebell in your hand, how heavy it is, et cetera, that center of mass needs to stay over the base of support. And the closer the center of mass is to the center of your base of support, the better balanced you'll be. So these are the 5 things that we're thinking about here, and we can apply these things to improving your form and cleaning things up a little bit.
All right, let's practically apply these for some people. And I'm going to give you a skill and then what we want to use as the example, one of the first principles. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Are you ready for this is the lightning round. Okay. We're going to go with the press and we're going to go with managing force lines. So, how can we use these force lines to help improve our press or actually make our press?
There are two things that I think are most common with the press that people miss. So I'll talk about those. The same rules are always going to apply, but
Yeah.
one is the elbow position. The joint that you're going to use primarily to move the kettlebell is going to be your shoulder joint. When you're looking at what's rotating to make the bell go up, your shoulder joint, we'll call that the primary joint. Other joints are moving and important, obviously, but that's the primary. So you have one end of that joint. The other end of your joint is the elbow. So when you have this rigid structure and one end is rotating at your shoulder, the force is coming out at your elbow. That's the point where you're actually applying the force to the bell.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see your body respects that because more or less your forearm is making a very abrupt right turn or 90-degree turn rather.
Yeah.
In order to follow the line of that force. So where your elbow is relative to the center of mass is going to dictate where the bell moves. And what a lot of people seem to miss is the elbow will stay behind in some cases, or it won't be underneath the center of mass of the bell. So if you look at, forget about all the other mechanics. If you look at where a press starts and where it finishes.
In the rack.
Okay, so it starts in the rack. So the center of mass of the bell, we'll just forget about the body of the bell, is going to be to on the front side of your body, but to the side of your forearm. Would you say that's fair?
Yes.
Okay. When the press finishes, is the center of mass of the bell going to be more toward the front of your body or the back of your body?
The back.
So it's going to be more toward the back, and rather than the outside, it's going to be behind you. That whole kettlebell is going to go in a spiral, and it'll be behind you. So we could draw a line that starts in the front and ends in the back going up. So we could draw like a slight diagonal line. Your elbow has to be in front of that center of mass in order for you to get a good push on it. That doesn't mean that you're not going to spiral. It doesn't mean that you're just going to go straight up like that, because that doesn't work. But your elbow, as you push, is going to need to get in front of the bell to push back. Okay, so Newton's third law, the whole idea, which would be another first principles idea.
Save it for a bonus. Don't give too much away.
So it would be, the whole equal and opposite thing, right? So if I want the bell to go up and back, then I need my elbow to be forward and underneath. So I got to get that elbow underneath. Really,
so
really
it's
important.
Kind of like a little push forward with that elbow as you're driving up through that forearm.
I don't, I see what you're saying, and that might work practically as a cue, but basically it's just about where it is. So when you go back, remember we were talking about the squat and where the knee is over the foot?
Yeah.
Same concept.
Okay.
The elbow has to be underneath the center of mass of the bell, slightly in front of it and slightly underneath it if we're going to be able to push into the bell. And if you don't get that elbow in the right spot,
if you chicken wing it out, you're only going to be able to go up as high as that or something like that, if anything.
Yes, and that's actually a good segue into the second thing, which is where you actually push. So the idea of the vertical forearm, this is another thing we think, and this is a mistake that people make, because I think a lot of it comes down to barbell training, because barbell training is straighter lines. People talk about having this vertical forearm, but when your forearm is vertical, you're actually moving the center of mass of the bell away from the elbow.
You're moving so now you've got, so it's way out here, and you're now creating more torque.
Yep, you're creating exactly right. You're creating torque, so you're violating that. So you see, like you said, these all go together. So when you angle the elbow in or the forearm in just a little bit, you're actually pushing through the forearm into the center of mass of the bell, right?
Which isn't the handle. FYI.
It's not the handle. It's the ball. So
if you're just focused on
if you're focused on the hand, you're actually creating rotation rather than displacement. So those are two things that you want to think about with your lines of force. And as a bonus, you can generally think that you want to keep the center of mass of the bell over the foot, more or less, or within easy striking distance, and that's just gonna keep you safer. We have a
Yeah.
whole episode on keeping the bell over the foot, so watch
Yeah.
that.
And yeah, do that. And then, so let's go with the swing and let's
Mhm.
create torque the right way. So there's the whole idea of get your hips back. It's a hinge. And there's countless things about this that you've expressed, but how do we get the right torque when we're working a swing? What does that even mean?
I think that the thing to realize is that torque on the way up is our friend. When you look at what's actually creating most of the vertical and horizontal motion in the swing, it's going to be most of the force is going to be vertical. It's going to be pushing straight down. But when you push the feet straight down, that is going to set off a chain reaction where your bones are moving your pelvis, and your pelvis is really swinging through an arc, or your torso is. And because your arms are attached to your torso and your hands are holding the bell, you're sending this bell through an arc that you want it to be as big as possible. You want to understand too, well, if your goal is to have maximum force generation. So you want to understand that the thing that makes torque happen is straight line force. So your straight line force needs to be straight down into the ground rather than shoving the hips forward. And this is something that people misunderstand. They push the hips forward and they're actually eliminating their torque production because they think, oh, well, torque is rotational force. It's not rotational force. It's what happens when straight line force moves away from the center of mass of an object. And when you think about where, your center of mass is not going to be straight over your feet. It's always going to be over
When
your
that
feet,
bell-
or you lose balance, right?
Right. But not
in
exactly
order-
aligned.
In order for that to happen, when you're pushing that force, you can't move the bell straight up and down because of the constraints of your joints. So in order for your body to get back to standing, you've got to go from that bent position to a straight position. And then as that happens, you're going to be swinging through this big arc. That's going to happen by pushing straight down. That's going to be the most efficient way to do that. It's not going to be the hips coming forward, because then you're just going to be pushing the hips forward to your balance. You'll compromise your balance and you won't have a direct line of force to swing the bell. So if you think about, you got a bat, you're trying to hit somebody, or maybe I could just say hit a baseball. Maybe that'd be more civilized.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm talking about coasters and
all
hitting
this
people with
merry-go-round
bats.
violence and hitting people
So-
with bats.
If you really want to swing it hard, you're not going to push the end of the bat forward. You're going to use the length. You're going to use that distance. So you're basically, if you're looking at your torso as a lever like the bat, you're going to apply all the force at one end, which is going to make the whole thing swing, and that's going to result in more torque. That's probably a simpler way to put it.
Okay, I like that. And then just to reiterate, the reason why it's your friend on the way up is because it's going to essentially snap it and take it the direction you want to go. And why it's not your friend on the way back is if you start to move those hips back, now you've created a bigger gap, and then the torque will then apply pressure to where it's essentially spinning from. So that would be your hips, i.e. your low back. Am I correct in that sort of explanation of it?
It would be your spine. Yeah. So
Sure,
as soon
spine,
as that bell moves away from your body, your whole center of mass is going to change and you're not moving as a unit anymore. So then what you're essentially doing is you're creating distance between the bell and the spine. And then that's going to create another moment arm. And that's going to be something that you have to evaluate. So that's going to create torque on the spine, which you don't want.
Yeah. So there you go. You can fix your swing if you're like, oh, it hurts my back. And then you start watching, you're like, oh, you have a lot of torque because you're breaking back too soon. So stop doing that. Common. So common. All right. We're going to use the clean to talk about redirecting inertia. So remember, inertia is keeping it moving forward or changing it from moving at all.
Inertia is a tendency. You can say it's equal to mass, but it's a tendency of objects to resist changes. So objects want to do whatever they're doing. If they're moving, they want to keep moving. If they're still, they want to stay still. They don't like change. And the more mass something has, the more it doesn't like to be changed. So one of the things you can think about with the idea of inertia and the clean is when you are going to redirect the bell. And this applies this applies with the snatch as well. If you want to get the bell from the ground and you go back into a swing position, so you're doing a swing clean, and then you want to bring it up into the rack, are your legs stronger than your arms?
Heck yeah.
Okay,
At
well, they
least for
should be.
now.
So
Yeah.
What you're going to do is you're going to accelerate the bell, right, at a sufficient rate. You're going to overcome the inertia, and you're going to get the bell moving at a rate accelerating faster than gravity to a substantial degree, and you're going to make what we would call the bell weightless. So you're respecting the inertia of the bell, you're getting it moving with your legs, and once it's moving up kind of on its own, it's going to be a lot easier to redirect. It doesn't mean that you don't apply any pull or any force at all to the bell before that point. It just means that
it's less mass for you at that time, right?
yeah, and you want to get it moving with your legs before you redirect with your arms. Even though you are still kind of pulling it away, you don't want to wait until you've completely finished generating the force for your clean or your snatch and then start pulling, because the bell will get away from you. So you're going to kind of pull it in toward you, but you're not trying to redirect it. Your goal is to just keep the bell close to you. And then once you finish your leg drive, right, you've overcome the inertia of the bell, and really the force you're resisting here is gravity. Then you can redirect the bell and bring it into the rack position. So this would be, if you're watching someone's clean or someone's snatch and they're having problems there, then you're saying, you understand the tendency of things that are like, oh, that looks really clunky. That bell is resisting. Well, if that bell's resisting, let me make sure that I've got the right things working at the right time to overcome that resistance. And then the whole thing's going to go a lot easier.
Yes. And that falls into the same line as once that bell's going away from you in the clean and then you're trying to yank it back, that's a much more difficult way to overcome inertia because it wants to just keep going at that point. And so when you think about this, to Roger's point, if you're getting those bangy cleans or back to our big arc snatch, you're going to want to fix that, and that keeping that arm close to that body and then kind of like redirecting it, like you said, right as it comes up in front of you. And then you're just basically, it has no forward motion going, really. Nothing getting it outside of your base of support. I'm using these are not buzzwords, people. These are terms. Okay. There's a
First
difference.
principles.
First principles. All right, let's use the first principle of controlling the center of mass for the getup, and then we'll get into the snatch real quick, and then. But I want to talk about that because that's a big, complicated move where the center of mass changes several times throughout. Am I right?
Oh yeah, it's going to change for sure, and it's going to change more depending upon where the bell is. To manage the center of mass, to troubleshoot this, it's going to be a lot of trial and error. And when I teach the getup, it's unloaded. Sometimes I'll do the shoe, but I don't usually do the shoe. It really is about creating a structure, and you can feel where your center of mass is going to be. And whether or not you're balanced, and you're building a framework, and you're finding a way to keep your body or your limbs underneath each step in the getup, and you're finding a way to support it from underneath. So remember, if we look at the definition of balance, it's going to be keeping the center of mass over the base of support. So yes, if the base of support changes, which it does significantly, you start a getup lying flat on your back, and then you're going into your roll, and yeah, you got a sweep and standing and all that stuff. So that stuff is changing. So your goal is to, your center of mass, as long as you've maintained balance, and you'll know if you're losing balance because you feel it or you'll be wobbly. What you want to do is figure out how to get as much stuff underneath the bell within your base of support. And how do you keep the bell? Because the bell is the thing we're really working on moving. How do we keep that in the center of whatever that base of support is, whether it's, your feet, or your, 2 feet and an arm, or one foot more than the other, whatever. Sometimes, you only have 2 points of contact in your hand and your foot at one point in the getup. That's what you'd think about with the getup. Is if you're seeing someone losing balance or they're not moving well, then what you can say is, this person's not managing balance well. Let me move a point of contact first. Let's start with where the force comes from. That's the ground. So does this allow the person to move anyway? Sometimes people are just so jammed up they can't generate force. But if they can't generate force, then maybe a limb is too far out. Maybe the foot's not where it needs to be, the hand's not where it needs to be. And then once you go through the transition phases, you want to look at the support. Now that in the quiet phases of the getup, Do I actually have a limb or something underneath that's relatively straight in a way that can support this bell? So all of those things are really going to be looking at your managing your balance. And again, your center of mass needs to stay over your base of support if you're going to be able to move well and safely.
All right. Yeah, you have to use all these, everybody. So quit messing around. Think about this stuff. Use it. When it comes to the snatch, that basically applies pretty much everything all at once. Yeah.
It's a complex move for sure. We can think about, where to apply the leg drive. If you're
Yeah.
looking to move an object and the object we're looking to move is the kettlebell, and we know that force moves in straight lines, where are we going to want to apply the straight line force? Where should the bell be in the progression of the snatch if we're going to apply the straight line force most efficiently?
Want me to answer that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. The bell will be, is that when it's in the backswing a bit behind you? And then we have the ability to generate the force?
It's going to be as it comes forward more toward the heel of the foot, because
Yeah.
it's
So,
got to
okay.
be
That's right.
it's got
That's
to be
right.
over the foot.
Yeah, it's stretched out. Yeah, first principles. Is it over the foot? Okay. So essentially, you're exactly right. Yeah, that's right. So as you have that bell coming forward, you're pushing as hard as you can when it's essentially lined up with your heels and like making its way, arm still connected to the body.
Yeah. Before that, you got some stretch, and that's an important phase. Don't get me wrong, but you're not really going to be able to use your glutes and quads at the same time to apply most force, and that's when you're kind of switching hats and you're talking anatomy. That's where you're going to be able to apply those muscles the best. So the bell should be over the foot in order to create the torque that needs to happen. Okay, but it's going to be a product of that straight line force. So we want to think about the lines there. Then we can think about this idea of inertia. So same thing that applied to the clean, that we want to overcome the inertia of the bell with the legs and then redirect it with the arm when it's already in that kind of float, that kind of free flight phase of the ballistic. And then we want to think about maybe we're shifting forward. If you look at the top of a snatch, that bell is going to land behind you. So a little bit of displacement forward is going to help you with your balance. So
Mhm.
we're looking at it. We're looking at all of those things, and if you have a problem in any of these segments, then you can understand how these first principles apply and say, okay, well, if I see someone pulling up the arm, pulling with the arm, or they're having pain, like in the
Yeah.
forearm, the neck, whatever, then you say they've got an inertia problem, that they're not overcoming inertia with the muscles I want them to use. So let's make sure we're working on the leg drive. If it's really clunky, again, that's another clue. If they're having a hard time in the catch, let me teach them where they're going to be balanced. Let me just have them get into that position and have them lean forward and have them feel, hey, does this feel a little more balanced? If you feel
And the
that
same thing is like when you're coming down, are you leaning back through the
exactly
ankles, creating
exactly
that
right.
balance? Yeah.
Yeah. And because you're leaning back because your bell is moving forward. So again, it's
Mhm.
that Newton's third law, and it's maintaining balance. And then you can get back into your straight line stuff. If they feel like they're not generating force at all, then you can look at the line. Where is the bell? Where's the bell actually when they're applying force? Because this happens when the bell comes away from the body. They don't maintain that arm to body contact. The bell is in front of them, and then they generate their really hard leg drive. Well, that's not at the right time. That
Yeah.
that bell is too far forward, so you're not really respecting the lines of force.
Yeah. You're not going to get the benefit of that torque. And then you're going to have to overcome a crazy amount of inertia. And then it's probably going to throw you off balance because you're wildly out of control. You're like somebody on a bull for the first time at Saddle Ranch. All right.
So these
If you
these
don't know what that is, I don't, I don't know what to tell you.
I
It's an
actually
LA
I,
thing.
I actually get that one. Um, these things, I understand they sound complicated at first, but even if you just go back and read on them and figure out what it is, if you can figure out how to use these things and manipulate them in your training, you will be able to solve a lot of form problems. And then you'll be able to kind of plug and play and put them into individual context. And I wish someone even were to send us in a video. Someone wants us to break down their form. We can do a practical, like, hey, this needs to be here, this needs to be there. Because this stuff makes way more sense once you actually see it in context. You just have to get the reps in and start thinking.
So there's tons of tips in this episode. So if you like what you see and you like what you hear, please subscribe, like, And tell us what coasters you use. As the light just went out on me. That's a good sign right there, Roger. You got anything else? All right. Be sure to download the Bells app because it's free and there's lots of training in there, and you'll get better kettlebells from watching our stuff and using that app. All right. Stay strong, everybody.